Welcome to episode 2 of the CHABSS podcast. Today's podcast is focused on innovation in CHABSS. Later on, we'll be joined by Dr. Matt Atherton, who's the current faculty fellow of the Innovation Hub. We'll also be joined by Dr. Scott Gross from the Innovation Hub. But first, our first guest is Dr. Vanderbilt, who was one of the faculty fellows in cohort 2 of the Innovation Hub last year. Kimmy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. And you also brought some really cool props. We'll get into those later, but those are really cool to see as part of what you do. Kimmy, you were faculty fellow in that cohort 2, which was last year. What were your reasons behind taking on that challenge?
Oh, yeah. This is something I've been really wanting to do for a long time. And I'm really grateful to the Innovation Hub and to CHABSS for giving me the opportunity to work on this project I'm really excited about. So the project that I worked on is a collaboration with the San Diego Children's Discovery Museum. And we were excited about, we've been talking about this forever, but it was really nice to be able to finally do something about it. We want to design museum exhibits to encourage informal STEM learning, and particularly parent-child conversations, which we know lead to informal STEM learning. So we've had this idea, like I said, for a long time, and it's just really nice to be able to have the time to put that into practice and to design new museum exhibits that can encourage learning for families in the local community and provide research opportunities for our students. So yeah, it's wonderful to be able to take on this challenge and to provide this many benefits, I guess, to different people.
In that project that you took on, what would you say? Would you say there's one or two huge accomplishments or pride points that once you left that position that you really felt like we can really hang our hat on this, what we were able to do?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I should tell you a little bit more about the project. So San Diego Children's Discovery Museum and I have been talking about ways to increase informal STEM learning from museum exhibits. So we know that parent-child conversations are really important for informal STEM learning, and we know that parents differ in the amount they feel comfortable kind of engaging in STEM talk, so using STEM or science-related words when they're at exhibits with kids, or asking what we call WH questions, so who, what, why, when, where, how questions. And so we wanted to design a museum exhibit that would encourage that kind of interaction because we know that it leads directly to informal STEM learning. So what we did, and I swear I'm getting to the pride point thing, but there's context. So what we did is we took one of their existing exhibits and we redesigned it in a really thoughtful and purposeful way. So we included, that's why I brought the props, because it helps to kind of explain what we did. So we included some thoughtful thematic artwork that kind of models collaboration. So you can see in the picture kind of right here, there's a family and they're reading together. So we included those elements. We used literacy as kind of a gateway to STEM and particularly engineering related concepts for this particular exhibit. So the idea is that you would read a book and then you could build something related to what you read about in the story. And then we also had kind of these cool innovative challenges that would say okay, you read this book on a rocket ship, try building this cool rocket ship out of these blocks. And kind of putting all that together kind of led to these increases in informal STEM learning that we saw in children. So actually learning about the concepts that the exhibits were meant to kind of teach them about, essentially. So I guess the pride point is that we were, with these changes that we made to the exhibit and really careful measurement and observation, we were able to determine that we actually really did increase the STEM content in the way that parents and children interacted at the exhibit. So we saw a tripling in the number of STEM words that parents used when they were interacting with their children at the exhibit. And we saw a tripling in the number of WH questions, so those who, what, why, when, where, how kind of questions that parents asked to children while they were at the exhibit interacting. And to us, that means that we can increase what children are learning from essentially the same experience. And I think that's really cool. And I'm excited to expand on that and to basically see what else we can do to kind of increase those things. So that part of the project is really cool because it worked. The other things that I'm really excited about and proud about is that we were able to make a difference in the community. So we found something that actually makes the museum a more educational place than it already is, and it encourages parents to engage with children around science so we can build science understanding in our community. I love that. Sorry, I'm such a nerd. And then the other thing that I think is really important to me about this project is the opportunities that it afforded to CSUSM students. So because we were able to do this project, we were able to offer students in psychology and child development, opportunities, and other majors too, actually. I have a social sciences major in my lab and a couple others. Opportunities to essentially take what they're learning in their classes and put them into practice and get real world experience that can really help them with their future careers. And I was able to take on more students because I had, more projects and more interactive things for them to do. And I think that's really great. And that's kind of part of the reason why we do all of this, is to create those learning opportunities for students and help them get that real world experience.
You clearly put a lot of yourself into your work here on campus, obviously outside of campus as well. You have a 3-year-old in your personal life. How much does your work with him and his development, how much does that inspire or change the way you look at your research?
Oh my gosh. So my son is a character. He has a very large personality. But he's just kind of aging into, so he just turned 3 about a month ago. And he's kind of just aging into that area where I focus on in terms of child development. So he's just kind of getting into like the stuff that I actually research. But it's interesting to see him. I would say like maybe my research informs like my parenting a little bit more, where it's easy or it's fun, I guess, to see him kind of reach the milestones that I talk about in my classes. So one kind of silly thing that I did, I was teaching child development this semester, and I took some of the research studies and research projects that we were learning about in class, and I tested them out on my son and videotaped it on my phone, so I could bring it to class and show them. And we talk about sort of like, is it normal for a 2.5, 3-year-old to pass this task or not, or to have this understanding? So it's interesting to see the parallels between the things that I research a little bit, the things I talk about in my classes, and kind of his own development. But I haven't like gotten any good ideas from him yet. So he still has some work to do to help me out on my research side. The next couple of years, I'll be really looking to him for some inspiration.
Whether he wants to or not.
Whether he likes it or not.
That's
exactly.
Right. Your lab is the research on children's knowledge of social thinking and reasoning. Perhaps not coincidentally, you call that the Rockstar Lab, which we have met some of the students that you've worked with, and they're really amazing students, I'm sure. What other projects are you proud of, or what maybe you're thinking about in the future besides the redesign of the Children's Discovery Museum?
Yeah, so we do this work on informal STEM learning. We're also working on a lot of other projects related to social cognitive development, which is the main area that I work in typically in my research. So the projects that we investigate are loosely focused around things like children's development of skepticism. So how do they learn when someone might be a good source of information or when they might not be such a good source of information? So they learn to judge essentially the internal traits of others. So if someone is nice or honest or knowledgeable about something the child needs, and subsequently whether they are a good source of information for what the child needs to know. And recently we've extrapolated that out to things like, well, how do you look at sources? So sources of information that are individuals are easy to think of in terms of children's learning. If someone tells you that, the sticker is hiding in the green box and not the yellow box, do you trust them based on what you know about them? But recently we've extrapolated that out to things like beyond human sources, so things like the internet. And when is it okay to share information on the internet? If you know the information is true, if you know that it's false and you share it anyway, or if you think about checking and you don't check it and you share it anyway. So we're interested in how children sort of judge those different circumstances in terms of sharing information and the consequences that sharing different kinds of information have. We're also interested in things like how children select social partners. So shout out to one of my graduate students who's working on his thesis that is looking at how children weigh factors like coolness in when selecting friends versus things like niceness. and thinking about how those factors are important for children in their decision making about friends. So like, will they choose to be friends with someone who's really popular but maybe not as nice, or someone who's less popular but is actually a really nice person? So those are some of the projects we're working on. We have a lot of different things, but those are some of the highlights right now.
Is there a typical path for a student that's in your lab? Is it generally graduate school after that, or is it a wide range of where they go?
It's a fairly wide range. So we take the success of our students really seriously. It's really important to me that they are gaining skills from our lab that actually help them with their future careers. So one of the main things that we do at the museum is actually interact with children and families, and our students receive a lot of training in terms of communicating complex science concepts like the information that they learn about in their psychology, the upper division psychology classes. And they get training in actually how to express those things and those points to parents and to children who don't necessarily have a background in child development or psychology. So a lot of the training goes into how can you take this really complicated thing and explain it in a way that's easy for someone to understand, even if they don't have a background in it. And that's one of the things that we talk about is essentially like a big deliverable for them. A lot of my students go into careers in counseling or in family or child-related careers like preschool teachers, MFTs in counseling, things like that. And so those skills are really translatable to their future careers. Let's see. A lot of them go to grad school, but not all. They all have different goals. And I think one of the great things about our lab is that it can give experience that can be useful in a lot of different careers. Another pride point for me, is that I think there were 6 students that graduated from my lab this year, and they all got into graduate school. And so that to me feels like just like a proud mama moment, that they all got that experience, and they're all kind of off to the next best thing, and we love that for them.
We talk about this often in CHABSS specifically, the impact that our faculty make, and it's really hard to define. You've clearly made an impact, and you continue to do that. Is there anything else in your career you're hoping to accomplish before the end of that, or is it just you're taking it kind of year by year and just seeing where it takes you?
Oh my gosh, the sky's the limit. I'd love to do more of this stuff. It's kind of like whatever I can do, whatever I have time to do, I'm excited to do it. I'm excited to build more collaborations related to informal STEM learning. I'm excited to be able to provide opportunities to more students. All I need is, someone to give me a bunch of money and free time, and I can get all this stuff done. But it's kind of like one of the things that I think is maybe like something I struggle with in the job is that I have so many things I want to do and just not enough time to do all of it. So goals. Yeah, I think just finding the next interesting thing and finding a way to tackle it. I find that really exciting, and I'm happy for the ability to be able to get a good idea and try to find the answer, or try to find the answer to a question. And I don't know if that's a really good answer about a goal, but yeah, I'm just really excited to do more and to continue to build this new research area that we've started through this collaboration.
That's awesome. You did bring a couple of props. I want to take a look at those. If you can kind of explain the relevance of those to the project that you did at the Children's Museum.
Yeah, so sorry. I work with kids. I can't not bring toys. So first off, a couple things that I brought, some examples of kind of the Storytime Inventing exhibit that we designed. So I brought an example of kind of that trajectory that we were talking about. So we would have kind of like the thematic book about maybe like rocket ships or something like that, and children and their families could read the book about rocket ships using literacy as kind of that entry point, and then they might be challenged to learn about spaceships and rocket ships, and then they could build their own out of these like cool blocks. So I tried my best to build a rocket ship before I came here. And then the other thing I wanted to share is just some of that really cool thematic artwork that was commissioned for this exhibit. It's just so beautiful that I think it's really worth sharing. And all this stuff is still, so this exhibit, it's been there for about a year now, but it's still up at the San Diego Children's Discovery Museum. So just kind of a little sneak peek for anyone who's interested in stopping by there, checking it out, maybe bringing their family down to see it and experience it. So we have this just really beautiful artwork, like I said, with models like parents and children kind of interacting together at the exhibit, doing things together, building together, cooperation.
And what sort of feedback have you received, or maybe you've heard from the patrons that attend the museum?
I know we've gotten a lot of good feedback about the new exhibit and the artwork that's related to it. I think it's just really exciting. So the thing is that at the museum, new things are always happening. Things are always changing. They're always getting updated. I think every time I go there, there's something new. And that makes it really exciting. And trust me, I go there a lot. So I go there for research, but now I also go with my son, and it's his favorite place to go. So I think it's less about the feedback for a specific exhibit that's important, and more about kind of the overall kind of experience of what's going to be new, what can I do here, what can I create, what can I discover, what can I learn in this space that is making that more and more available and more, and I'm making me more and more encouraged to do it. I don't know if that's kind of the right answer, but I think that's the idea behind the museum and what we're really trying to create in general.
If you had to make a elevator pitch, the 30-second elevator pitch for why museums are important, not only to children that you work with, but to families overall, to be able to share in that experience, how would you pitch that?
Oh my gosh, putting me on the spot. So informal STEM learning is like the learning that goes on at a museum rather than, say, in a formal setting like a classroom. And we know that informal STEM learning leads to increased interest in STEM concepts and increased interest in future STEM careers. So I think the museum's vision and what they really want to do, and what we really try to do there with this exhibit, is create a sense of wonder and curiosity and discovery in children. And seeing children experience that, like, oh, I could do this, like that little spark, I think that is what I really love as a parent when I'm there, is seeing my son get really excited about something and know that he's learning at the same time. And I think that's something really wonderful that spaces like museums give, that's something really wonderful they do for us as families.
Absolutely. We like to end with something that shows a little more a human side to our faculty. So I will ask you, what's your favorite book and favorite movie?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So right now I don't have a lot of time for reading books or watching movies because I mainly do research and teach and then chase my toddler around. But I'm trying to think of what I'm into right now. So there's a podcast that I listen to in the car when I'm driving back and forth. It's called You're Dead to Me. And it's a podcast where they talk about different people from history, and there's a historian or an expert, so like another professor, and a comedian, and they kind of talk about someone that like Anne Boleyn or Cleopatra, and you get to learn about them, and I just find that really entertaining. So I'm really into that right now. And besides that, I just watch a lot of Pixar movies at home with my toddler.
Kimmy, thank you so much for all the work that you do for CHABSS students and for the university overall. And thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm Marlette Hernandez, and I'm joined by Dr. Matt Atherton, an associate professor in the Interdisciplinary Social Sciences program. Dr. Atherton is currently a faculty fellow at the Innovation Hub. So, Dr. Atherton, thank you for joining us today. Dr. Atherton, you have a passion for increasing student success and supporting underserved populations. Did that desire motivate you to pursue your current role as fellow?
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of this like serving students and student success comes from my experience. So like I was first generation college student. I was a transfer student. I'm local, so I grew up in Escondido. I went to Palomar College, and I've told this, I do the transfer orientation every summer, and so I always tell this story of like, I would love to tell you this story of like, oh, I always wanted to go to college and I always wanted to be a professor. Like, no. Like, I didn't do well in high school, and I was living with my grandma at the time, and she gave me 3 options, which was like, full-time job, go to school full-time, or move out. And, it's funny now because students kind of gasp at that because they think like, oh, your grandma was mean. And I was like, oh, that's the nicest thing she could have done to me. Like, she kind of lit that fire. So I went to Palomar, transferred to UCSD. And so I think my journey was very non-traditional, and the amount of things I didn't know because I was first generation, that my parents didn't know. I was sort of just like flying by the seat of my pants, and in some ways it's like following my friends. Like some of them went to UCSD, and so I think for me, I have this understanding of that experience. For a lot of our students are transfer students, a lot of our students are first generation college students, and I think for me, it's helping those students in the ways that I was helped. I know the term like safe space is it's weird right now, super political, but like I always tell my students I want my office to be this safe space for them where they can come in if they were first generation like me, or again, any of these populations that sort of get typically talked about as underserved or non-traditional, that they can just come ask me questions, right? What's this? Or what's, a lot of them, like, I didn't know what grad school, I knew grad school existed, that it wasn't like Santa Claus, right? It was a real thing, but that's all I knew. And so I want that space to be for students to come in and be able to say, oh, like, I've heard of grad school, and what is it? And not feel judged, right? Or ask any question about college or this whole experience and not be judged. So all of that like colors all of the things I do, my teaching, my service. It all sort of is very student focused and helping those students like me. And we'll talk about it later. I think how I kind of came to the Innovation Hub was, I think social innovation in this innovation process is a way to engage students and get them excited and also get them to apply knowledge. And I think it connects that gap, I think, for non-traditional students, like, what is the value of college, and why do they come, and what's it worth? And I think having innovation is a good way for them to like take this knowledge and skills that they have and create something with it. And so I think that, and we can talk about it later, but like that's how I sort of came in contact with the Innovation Hub, is through my class and through using it in my classroom. And so when they put out the call sort of for me to go through the process of creating my own innovation, I was sort of excited about that. And so it did, to sort of answer your question, it did spring from my just my desire for like helping students succeed and things like that. And again, that's sort of through all my work, my research and service and all that stuff, that seems to be the thing that drives me to do what I do.
I think it showcases your empathy very well.
Yeah, and again, this is what college is for, is to empower students and help them.
And your innovation project is exploring punishment and civic duty through justice-based simulations. Was that your choice to focus on that, and what has been some of the outcomes this year?
So yeah, that was my choice. And so when I was chosen as sort of innovation fellow, it was to come up with some sort of idea. And there was sort of two themes early on that I wanted to do for this project. And one of them was to sort of focus on empowering students, and this idea of agency, of getting students to be able to, to think about if there's sort of, whether it's in their personal life or their professional life coming up, that there's some sort of problem that presents themselves, that they have this belief, that this agency, that they can fix the problem, or they can solve the problem or get around it. And and it doesn't mean it's easy, right? But like, it is just that, it is sort of like, to oversimplify, like this belief that you can, address a problem, or through hard work, and again, it doesn't have to be alone, through networking and things like that you can solve a problem. And I think we've seen recently that's sort of gone down in students, and that they don't have this sort of belief that they have sort of power to do these things. And especially if we get back to what we talked about earlier with underserved populations or non-traditional populations, a lot of times there isn't that belief. And it goes back to what we talk about, what is a first-generation college student? Like, first-generation college students work hard and they're smart. They're not, they're not less capable than other students. What often they lack is that, what we call like cultural capital, right? Their parents didn't have those experiences to pass down to them. And so that's sort of, again, I don't want to use the term lacking, but I mean, that's the thing that often they don't bring. They bring lots of other strengths, and I think agencies in there too, is that maybe it's sort of this lack of confidence or belief. So it's not lack of ability or lack of skill, it's sort of building that in them. And you can't just tell them about it, you have to sort of empower them. And then the other thing was talking about justice. Like, what is justice? And right, that we could talk about that for an hour. Like, justice means different things to different people. For some people, it's about fairness in terms of like, well, just like a just outcome is where everyone is treated fairly, or you have equal opportunity. And for some people, justice is retribution. If someone steals your car, you're angry, right? And so justice for you is punishing that person for stealing your car. And it's more complicated than that. And so it was sort of to combine these ideas that, you know, if someone feels that they have not been treated fairly or unjustly by whatever, by a system or things like that, do they have the power to sort of advocate for themselves? And again, we could talk about all sorts of things in terms of like rent. Do you feel like your landlord's not treating you fairly? We could be talking about criminal activities or things like that. So for me, it was like, how do we empower students and also start this dialogue about what justice is? And then we thought about doing sort of justice simulations, and I've done some in the past, and we could where I just did one last semester with a group of high school kids from Mission Hills High School, and they're in this like criminal justice club, and they came over, and what we did was we did these simulations about sentencing. So I won't go too far into it, but and I did my dissertation on this, is what they did, because when you sentence someone who's been convicted of a crime, they wanted to make sure that there's fairness there, because we were seeing outcomes based on, you know, we're seeing racial disparity or inequality, where, you know, minority groups were getting longer sentences for the same crimes, or more likely to be convicted. So what they did is they put in these federal sentencing guidelines. And so imagine you're the judge, and you're sentencing somebody. You would almost have this chart in front of you that would sort of say like, okay, was it their second offense? And it's, you know, it's this type of, so it was like criminal history and seriousness. So it's like, okay, it was a serious crime, it's their second offense. And then you'd have a little box that you could, that would give you a suggested sentence, like, I don't know, say 25 to 37 months. And you could pick anything in that box and you're good. So the judge still had this discretion. They could go outside that box, so they could either be more lenient or more harsh, but then they would have to write some sort of justification for it. So what I did with these students is we gave them a bunch of scenarios of like, you know, we'd start very simple, like it's this, you know, it's this person, this crime, and it's this serious. And then I would start tweaking that, and like, oh, they cooperated with the police, or, you know, it was the victim was particularly a vulnerable population or something like that, and just had them like go through, and they had a lot of fun, like kind of in groups arguing about like, oh, we're going to sentence, and so I had to they had to each go through and say like, how long did you sentence them, and things like that. I've used like for like scenarios for like law enforcement too, because I taught the law enforcement class for years, and it's one of these things where everyone comes into that class with a opinion about law enforcement. And nobody's wrong, right? Like some people come in very, very positive because they have parents that have been police officers, or their experiences with police have been very positive, that when they call them, the police come and, you know, and they're very helpful. And you have other students in class that have had very different experiences, right? Negative experiences. And they're both right. Both of their experiences are right. And what I tried to do in that class is get them to see that the answer's in the middle somewhere, like, there's inequality and injustice in policing, but also it's a very tough job. And so I used to give them same thing scenarios, like, okay, you know, one of the things we talked about is, you know, you're arresting a suspect who's very disrespectful and is like just really being particularly nasty to you and your partner kind of hits them while you're, you know, and then tells you like, hey, I'm going to say that I'm going to say in my report that this person struck me first. What do you do? And so, and it's a no-win situation, because even if you're sort of like trying to be noble and say, oh, no, I'm going to go in and say, tell the truth, like, well, that will have negative consequences for you. And where I'm going with my sort of the innovation is to do sort of like, and the process has been a little slow, but to do sort of like a mock trial, where I'm going to sort of work with the theater department to get actors to do this sort of short trial, a similar sort of thing, and that students will be in the jury. And so they'll sort of watch this trial, and then they'll have to vote for guilty or not guilty and have some sort of discussion. And then we can also have broader discussions about what I talked about earlier, like what is justice, what is, you know, what isn't justice. But I just think having these simulations are better than just reading about them, right? and we've talked about too, maybe an idea for the future is to take students to like the Vista Courthouse and have them watch, just watch some of the procedures in the morning, and then have them do some sort of activity there type of thing. So it's the same thing, that they're taking what they're learning in the book and then going through some sort of simulation to do that. And I think it's more empowering for students.
The Innovation Hub hosts an Innovation Challenge every semester. Can you talk about how you incorporate it into your class?
Yeah, so this is really what brought me to the whole using social innovation in the fellowship and things like that. And it kind of came out of post-COVID. So I've been teaching in social sciences. We have a capstone class, so it's for seniors at the end. And I tried a bunch of things in that classroom. We did like democracy in action. We did service learning, and then COVID hit, and then we sort of started to do. I just kind of did more of a pure research paper in that class, but I always wanted there to be that, like, kind of like what I was talking about with the simulations. I wanted that there to be that sort of like real application where they do something. And during COVID, they were writing this proposal, but it was very, I don't know, it was like kind of make-believe, right? Because it's like, oh, you're not going to actually do the thing. And I think there was more emphasis on like kind of the academic part, like, oh, go find articles and find theory. And then and by the way, you're going to come up with this idea that you're going to propose. With the Innovation Hub, they have a social innovation challenge every semester, and so it's open to all students. And I thought, it just gives me structure. It's a 4-page application. They have criteria of what they're looking for, and I thought this would be nice to have students do this. Like it is a contest that has rules, and it's like, so they're turning the paper into me, but they're also turning it into this outside thing, and it's just sort of like an extra. It just makes it a little more real, and it's, and I think it kind of emulates what they'll be doing in the real world. And so it almost shifted that assignment that I was talking about before, which was like most like front-ended with like theory and stuff like that. And now it's more about like, oh, you're coming up with this really interesting idea. And the other thing I think that it's really helpful to do is we talk about in that class wicked problems. And I don't know if you're familiar with this idea. It's just that, like, think of it like an idea, like a social problem like homelessness. Like, it's very complicated, right? Like, there's issues of, lack of housing is one concern, lack of available jobs, mental health, addiction. Like, it's really, and this even happens to me, that maybe you watch a documentary or something and you get inspired. You're just like, I want to help out. And then you get into it and it's like so complicated that you're just like, oh, okay, never mind, right? Or you just get discouraged because it's so, like, it's a wicked problem. It's like, think of like the roots going into the earth. It's just so complicated. So even if you somehow handled the issue of addiction, you still have issues of housing and all sorts of, and mental health and things like that. So, and this gets back to what I talked about too, like empowering students. So if they get interested and they want to solve a problem, and then they hit a wicked problem, and then they're just like this is too complicated for me. With the Innovation Challenge and what the Innovation Hub does is they have a process. Like I just don't tell them like, okay, good, like come up with an idea. I'll see you in 4 weeks. It's due in week 10. Good luck with that. Like we go through. There's an innovation process in design, like design thinking, and is this sort of process where you you identify a problem, and we also do some like cultural competency and cultural intelligence too, and say, okay, if you're going to help a population that's unlike you. And this is where like it very, very much aligns with like sociology and things like that. Like, if you're going to help, say you're targeting like a Latino neighborhood, or you're trying to help veterans, and you're not part of that population, you have to do some work, right, to make sure that you're not just this outsider coming in and being like, I know what you need, right? And it's like, well, understanding the culture and how they see the problem and how it affects them, and so that's part of the process. And then they have to. They have to then sort of define what the problem is, and then we get into this part that I enjoy, which is like the ideation phase, which is just like brainstorming. I joke, like I try and get my students like hopped up on Mountain Dew and sugar and like let them loose, like where I tell them like this is the time to be creative, and we do these exercises where they're just generating ideas, and most of them aren't going to be good, and that's okay. Like you try and tell them like to turn the critical part of their brain off, because it's just about generating ideas and ideas and ideas. And then unfortunately we kind of have to raid on their parade, right? Like once they have a bunch of ideas, then we have to sort of say like which of these are realistic, and that's like the prototyping phase. But that social innovation process and design thinking, I think it's just a good skill set. So it takes they can take a problem like homelessness, and again, I tell them, you're not gonna solve that, but if they can sort of slice off a thin part of it, like a specific issue or a specific population type of thing, and then they can go through this step-by-step process, like start here, go here, go here, go here. Then they do come up with these really interesting solutions, and it gets back to that empowerment. Then they don't, next time they come up to an issue like that, they don't sort of necessarily feel overwhelmed, or they're like, okay, I've done this before, I know how to go through this process and come up with sort of an innovation. I'm every student in my class, they have to submit an innovation for the contest, which generally happens in like the 11th week or 12th week of the semester. And yeah, it's been great. Like so far, like I've had students from my class win the last few years, and I always tell them that, like, you know, the process for my class is one thing, and the challenge is sort of different. Like I don't judge the challenge, but it helps them, right? It's like it's a real world thing. And so I tell them, like, that's not necessarily the goal, like to win the contest and get that comically large check, you know, because there is, I think it's $1,000 first prize and two $500 prizes for second and third place. So it is this, like, that's sort of motivation for some of them, that it is beyond just, you know, trying to pass my class and getting a good grade. Like it is this thing where they'll get recognized. And we also have had some things where the CHABSS Dean's office has come in later and looked at these students' ideas, or like student government has seen these innovations and then helped try and bring them to life. So again, there's that thing too, that beyond the classroom, they're coming up with these ideas that could be done. So.
Your PhD is on crime, law, and justice from Penn State. Was that always an area of interest for you in your life?
Yeah. I think for me, I came through sociology, and so sociology and criminology are very sort of similar. It's an oversimplification, but I always when I was in the criminology department here, I used to sort of oversimplify and tell students a lot of times that, you know, to me, criminology is sociology pointed at crime, and so asking questions of like what causes crime, and, you know, and things like that. So I think my two other degrees were in my BA and my MA were in sociology, but I always had this, I think criminology was always this sort of the topic that interests me. So when I was looking at grad schools, I kind of applied to both. I applied to some sociology programs that had criminology, and then in Penn State, it was crime, law, and justice. And it was the same thing like it is here, like where the criminology department, the sociology department were sort of one thing. You could get 2 degrees. And I think, yeah, just those ideas of justice. And so for me, I think to answer your question, like my passion's always been sociology, and criminology was just sort of the topic that, to me, it was the most interesting application of it. And I've done other work with, you know, with looking at education and stuff like that. And I always tell students this story that when I was looking at grad schools, I went to University of Colorado and visited, and I met a professor who did sociology of natural disasters. And I was just like, if I'd have went there, that's what I would have done. My career would have gone in a different direction. But yeah, so I think sociology has always been my passion, and I think criminology has been one of those things that are, you know, like crime, and it's been the one application that always interested me.
You've used technology like podcasting and literature like graphic novels to improve student learning. How have you found students respond to more modern forms of storytelling like those?
I think they really like it, and you know, part of, for me, like what I talked about, so I was a faculty fellow for teaching and learning in the faculty center for years, and a lot of the literature around teaching talks about that you have to tie what they're learning in the classroom to their lived experiences. You know, what's the point of what you're doing? And this gets back to your earlier question about you know, underserved populations and things like that, or first generation college students. So if we go back 25 or 30 years, You're just like, oh God, here he goes. Right? The types of students we would see in college were very similar. And there's nothing wrong with it, but like kind of very white middle class. That's who you sort of came, and so the population was very similar. The motivations to why they came to college were very similar. And so, but as that population diversified, you have people coming from different backgrounds and bringing different strengths and here for different reasons, right? Not just, a lot of them it is to get a degree and get a job, but for some people it's about, things we talked about, empowerment or helping their neighborhood or community. And so I think when you have these diverse experiences, you want to kind of be positive and like the strengths focus, and they call it like asset. You don't see students who come from different backgrounds, or again, there's this term non-traditional. You don't look at their deficits and sort of say, well, they're unlike students we've had before, and they're kind of lacking this or lacking that. Like, that's the sort of negative deficit thinking. You want to get into asset thinking and saying, well, yeah, but they bring all these experiences and they bring perspectives that maybe we haven't had in academia or haven't been given a voice in academia. And so with like podcasting or like use of graphic novels, a lot of it is that we're not just talking about this theory so you can memorize it for an exam, but it's something that impacts society and it impacts your life. And so a few years ago, I was part of the Common Read, and we did the graphic novel They Called Us Enemy, which I used in my classroom to do, which is about, it's the story, so it's a graphic novel, but it's a true story of George Takei, who's an actor, and he was on the original Star Trek, but as a child, he and his family were interned in he was in a Japanese American internment camp during World War II. So his parents were citizens, but they were put in these camps. I think when you read something like that, it's interesting because students learn about history, right? But then you want to tie it to the themes of the book. So even if they're not of Japanese American descent, and even if they haven't, experienced something like that, you can tie it to their lived experiences of justice and injustice. And there are themes in the book too about how his parents really protected him. Like, weirdly, he has these like positive memories of this horrible experience because what they did was they kind of like didn't tell him about it, and they played games with him and tried to have fun. And so that's a theme in terms of like your parents protecting you, and that's a theme that students can tie back to their lived experience. So even if they come from a different culture and a different background, that they bring that. And even in that, I think when I taught my popular culture class, I had them create like a comic from their life, and I didn't care what the art looked like, right? It could be literally like stick figures, like that's not the point, or they could kind of, this was kind of pre-AI, but I think I would have either been okay if they kind of used, like it's not an art class, but it was like using this visual medium to tell their stories. And it gets back to this thing that I keep talking about. It's like application of knowledge, that you're not just giving them facts, but how do they take that knowledge and apply it to their own lived experiences. So even something like justice, how have they, like we talked about before, how have they experienced justice in their life? And even if they've come from a pretty privileged life where we're not talking about justice in terms of criminal justice or things like that, but like I said, maybe they've had something, they have an argument with their roommate about who does the dishes or things like that, and so can they take these concepts and apply them to their lives? And that same thing with podcasting was a similar sort of thing. So
I think that's all. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and do this interview.
Thanks for having me.
Hi, Dr. Leora Gubkin, the Dean of the College of Humanities, Arts, Behavioral, and Social Sciences, and I have the great pleasure to be here with Dr. Scott Gross, the Associate Vice President of Industry Partnerships, and a dear friend and the driving force behind the Innovation Hub. So we're here for a few words about the Innovation Hub today. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, we are excited to have you here, and just a couple questions for you to sort of set the scene with what our viewers and listeners will hear about later today.
Great.
So you oversee our Innovation Hub on campus, And so I was hoping you could tell us about the innovation process.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for asking. So before I talk about the innovation process, I think it's important to talk about the roots of the Innovation Hub and why it got started. And so really at its core, what we're trying to do is bring faculty and students together with industry so that they can work together and solve problems. That's kind of the basic gist of everything that we're doing. And when we opened the Innovation Hub 3 years ago, we asked ourselves exactly how are we going to go about doing that? How are we going to bring faculty and students together with industry to solve problems? And we realized that we needed a little bit more scaffolding and framework. And so we worked hard to come up with an innovation process, which is not rocket science. As a matter of fact, those who look at it will see design thinking, really, which is the core of it. But it has 5 stages, and we always start with problem defining. So it's important whether it's faculty, students, or industry, we want to be really clear about the problem that we're trying to solve, because otherwise we can spin our wheels or come up with solutions to something that we think are really cool but don't actually solve a problem. So we're really clear about the problem we want to solve, and then the next stage is ideation, where we brainstorm a bunch of potential solutions to address that problem. The third stage is design and prototype. So you're going to pick one of those ideas that you brainstormed, and you're going to design it out and come up with a prototype if it's a product, or maybe an intervention or a curriculum, depending on what your solution really is. The fourth step is to test and see if your solution actually works. If it doesn't, you're going to go back to that list you created in the ideation phase and pick a different solution. Once it does work in the testing phase, then you move to the final step, which is implementation. This is also the time when you're implementing your solution, that might look like starting a business. It might look like getting a patent, or it might look like going and providing services to people. So the implementation has a bunch of different ways it can look.
Great. So I'm curious, as you're talking about bringing together the faculty and the students and the industry, the role that you see for CHABSS, for CHABSS students and faculty in particular. Is there something distinctive that CHABSS brings to the table?
Absolutely. And I think, I love that you use the word distinctive, because CHABSS is bringing something that the other colleges aren't necessarily. President Neufeld, when the Innovation Hub started, talked a lot about what she referred to as social innovation. Social innovation is this idea where we take those 5 steps that I just talked to you about, and usually in an innovation environment, those 5 steps point toward a new robot, or a new pharmaceutical drug, or a new product, like an iPhone. Those are all great. We want innovation to yield those exciting inventions. Social innovation is where you take that process and you bend it towards solving a social problem, right? So think about domestic violence or homelessness or racism. How do you use that innovation process, those 5 steps, and apply them toward helping a social problem get better or maybe even go away? And I think that's where CHABSS really has a foothold. Your faculty in particular bring an expertise to trying to understand those social problems that only they can do. And so I think our work around social innovation in particular is where CHABSS can really shine.
I absolutely agree. And I'm so delighted that we have this partnership. And it's amazing to me that it's actually only been 3 years, and sort of the growth that I've seen then in the Innovation Hub. And so I was wondering to take us out of this introductory section, if you could tell us a little bit about a signature program that you think is really wonderful on the campus.
Yeah, there are so many to pick from. So the Innovation Hub, I would say for our students, the signature programs probably are the Quick Pitch Competition, which is kind of like our Shark Tank, or the Social Innovation Challenge, which is similar to that kind of pitch competition, but it's really about solutions to a social problem. That's for students. For faculty, I think our signature program is the Innovation Fellows. This is a competitive program where faculty propose that they're going to work on an innovation project, and the provost appoints them into the position, and they get 16 months to work on that project and really, through that process, not only make progress on the project, the innovation that they want to explore, but they also serve as an ambassador for innovation to all faculty on campus. And I will say that CHABSS has had 3 different innovation fellows since we started the program 3 years ago, and so you are well represented as a college. And they're doing cool stuff and coming up with some really interesting discoveries along the way.
Absolutely agreed, and thank you so much for sort of giving us this introduction to the Innovation Hub and some of the important things that we're doing here around innovation at CSUSM.
It's my pleasure. I really appreciate the invitation so that we could highlight the good